So this time around, we want to create the necessary code to make this screen in our admin tool actually useful. And that is the listing of all reservations. Now we're going to have another one for listing new reservations, which of course means we're going to have to add a column to our database table for reservations that indicates whether it's been processed or not. If it's been processed, it's not new. If it has not been processed, then it is new. But we'll do that when we get to new reservations. So if you think about the things we need to do here, to start with, we're going to have a database query that gets a list of all reservations for us. And then we're going to have to create a handler that calls that database routine. And then somehow we're going to have to present that information in a meaningful fashion in this particular window. So let's get started. Let's go back to our IDE and look at our handlers, which are right here. And the one we're doing right now is listing all reservations. So before we actually send this information off, before we render this template, we need to get the list of all reservations from the database, which means we need to go to our postgres.go and add a new function here, and then add it to our repository and add one in our test repository as well. So I'll create a new function, which I'll call, well, it has to have the receiver Postgres DB repo, and I'll call this all reservations, which seems like a meaningful name. And it's not going to take any parameters because we want all of the reservations. And it will return a slice of models reservation and potentially an error. Okay, as we usually do, we'll copy our context lines and paste them in here. And then we'll create a variable, which I'll call reservations. And it will be a type of type models reservation, a slice of models reservation. And now we'll do our query. And the query is really simple. I'll put it in backticks so I can put it on as many lines as I want. Select, and I'm going to alias the table reservations to the letter R. We want the ID, the first name, the last name. I don't know why I got an I there. That should be an R. First name, last name, email, the start date, and the phone I'll put after email, the end date, the room ID, the created at, the updated at, and we're going to also want to get the room information. So we'll join that table in a minute, and I'll alias it to RM for room. The room ID, the room name. And we're going to be selecting that from reservations, R, and we will join, left join, rooms, RM, and we'll join it on r.roomid equals rm.id. And do I want to order this in any particular way? I probably do. Always good to get information, lots of information, and sort it in some meaningful fashion. So I'll order this by r.startDate, and I'll make it ascending. And if that doesn't suit our purposes, we can change it later. So now I have the query. I have a place to store this information, so let's get some rows and potentially an error from the database by calling m.db.queryContext. And give it the context, and give it our query. And it has no arguments in this case. And we'll check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, just return our empty variable, which is reservations, and the error. Otherwise, let's scan this for rows.next. What are we going to do inside of this? We're going to create a new variable, and I'll just call it I for item, and it's of type models.reservation. And now we'll scan our information into this newly created I variable. Rows.scan, and I'll put this on multiple lines so it's readable. And we're going to scan into the variable I, the ID, which is the first thing in our select statement. Then we'll scan into I first name. And let's just duplicate this a few times to make it faster. Then last name, then email, then phone, then start date, then end date, then room ID. And after that, we're scanning our created at, our updated at, and now we're scanning into our room, the ID, and then room name. Room name. All right, I'm not going to bother with the created at and updated at for the room because I'm actually not going to use that information. And if that doesn't work, if we have an error, we'll just check for the error. If error is not equal to nil, we'll return once again our reservations and the error. Otherwise, append this. So we'll append our new I variable to the reservations. Slice. Reservations equals append reservations and I. And then, as is always good practice, after we're finished our for loop, we'll check for one more error. If error equals rows.error, error is not equal to nil, return reservations and the error. And I think I missed some parentheses here. It looks like I did. Otherwise, everything worked. So we'll just return reservations and nil. No error. Okay. So let's give this thing a comment. Returns a slice of all reservations. And let's copy this and put it into our repository, which is under internal repository. So we'll put that right here. And then we'll copy the entire function and go to our testDB repo and put it in there and just make it as simple as we possibly can. So I'll delete all of this information, delete the context that we're not using, and give it the correct receiver, which is testDB repo. There. So this should compile. Let's make sure it does. It does. Okay, so let's stop our application and go put this in our handler and just see if it actually works. So back to our handlers, and we called this all reservations. So let's get our reservations. I'll call it reservations. Error is assign the value of m.db.allReservations. If error is not equal to nil, and I will just do helpers.serverError and return. So now we have our reservations. Let's put them somewhere. Let's create our slice for data. Data is assigned the value of make map string interface. Data, and I'll call the variable that I'm going to pass reservations is equal to reservations. And here I will pass that data in using our predefined member data, which is going to be equal to data. Okay, so this should work as well. So we now, if this works properly, we actually should have our reservations available to us in this template admin all reservations page. So let's see if we do. I'll get rid of the all reservations content, and just to see if it works, I will get the variable from my data and store it in a local variable, which I'll call res, is assign the value of index.data, and I called it reservations. That's the key I look it up with. And now I should be able to range res. And all I'll do, just to make sure this is working, is close this with an end. And inside of this, I will just print out the IDs one at a time, each one on its own line. So let's compile this, run, and see if we got everything right. Reload this. I got to log in, of course. admin@admin.com, password. go back to our dashboard and look at all reservations. And there they are. So I have a bunch of reservations in there. So now we've got our information being passed to this particular screen. And that seems to work well. So one thing I believe I forgot to do, and I probably should do that right now, is if I go to Postgres, did I defer rows close? I did not. Defer rows.close. That's better. Otherwise, I'm going to have a memory leak. So we have this actually working the way we want to, but the information we're displaying is not ideal. It doesn't look very good. It's just a list of IDs. So obviously, this is a lot of rows of information coming from the database that I want to display on this screen. So probably the best way to do this is to create a table. So let's do that. Let's go back to our admin all reservations page. And instead of just doing it this way and just displaying the ID, let's get rid of that and let's create a table. So we'll do the first part of our table outside of the loop, and we'll do inside of the loop each of the rows of information. So let's create a table. Table class equals table, table striped, and I'll add table hover as well. And that way when people roll their mouse over a given row in the table, it will light up. And I'll give this an ID. ID equals all res. I'm not going to do anything with that yet, but I will later. And the closing table tag, of course, has to be after this part. And here we want our T head to give it a nicely formatted head. And then we want a TR, and then one TH for each of the columns in the table. And I'll display all of the useful information. So I'll duplicate that a few times. I'll put the ID there. I'll put the guest's last name. And then I'll put the room they're staying in. And then I'll put the arrival and the departure. And that's probably enough. So that's our T head. Then we want our T body. And the T body's closing tag has to go after our range. And let's format this whole thing. And every time I loop through this, I'm going to be putting one row in. So I need a row tag. And then I have my TDs. TD, and the first one is just the ID, and I'll duplicate this a few times. Then the last name. Then the room.room name, because the room is actually stored as an entry in the struct, but it itself is also a struct of type room. And then we want start date is the arrival, and end date is the departure. All right, now that should work. Let's give this a try. Go back and just reload this page. Okay, that's not bad, but as you can see, as we start adding more and more reservations, this is going to become unwieldy. If we have 200 reservations, I'm going to be scrolling a long way down. I have no means of searching for a particular entry. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And in fact, there is. What we want is sometimes called a data grid and sometimes called a data table. And there are lots of them out there. Most of them use jQuery, but I made that decision early on that I want to use as little jQuery as I possibly can. And yes, I know that this uses jQuery, and that's fine. But I want to think about the future. And I want to, if possible, avoid using jQuery as much as I can. Well, there's a really good package based upon a really popular plugin for jQuery called Data Tables. And this one is called Simple Data Tables. And this is the URL right here. It's on github.com, and I'll put a link to this on the course resources for this lecture. This one doesn't use jQuery. It's lightweight, it's extendable, it's dependency free. So it's pure JavaScript. And this looks like it's exactly what I want. So I'm going to use this, and I'm going to copy these links that point to a content delivery network that allows us to use this without having to download it. And I'll go back to my template, and at the top I'll take advantage of that section we defined in our template called CSS, and I'll put my end tag in there and then format this, and then I'll just put in, first of all, the top part. I'll put in the link to the CSS, and then I'll cut the script part, the JavaScript, which I guess I missed a tag there. And now at the bottom I'll define, in our JS section, I'll paste in what I just cut and close that. Okay, now how do we use this thing? Let's go back and look. Features, install, quick start, if using the CDN. This is what we're going to be using. So let me copy this and come down here. And in my JS section of my template, I'll put in a script tag, paste in what they just gave me. I did not call my table, or the ID of my table, I called it all res, not my table. So it says what we're doing is this. Great, let's just get rid of all those other options and just go with the default install and see how that looks. So hopefully this will work. Let's save this, go back, find our page, and reload this. And look, that is much nicer. It really is. I can search for things. So if I search, for example, for Wayne, there's Wayne. I can paginate through the results, go back and forth. I can show more entries per page if I want to. I can show 5 per page. This looks ideal. Now, I have my nice hover thing here, which looks very good, but my stripe isn't working. Why isn't my stripe working? Well, if I inspect this, if I right-click on it and choose Inspect Element, it looks like somewhere in here I have a content wrapper. So that seems to be covering the entire section. And if I look at the CSS for this, it has a background. If I change that background to white, that looks a little better. It does. Now I have my stripe table. I still have my hover effect. So what I'll do is open my base template and change the CSS for content wrapper, which is easy enough. Let's go back over here and find our templates and find our admin layout. And in the CSS section at the top, just before my per page CSS, I'll put in a style tag. And I'll overwrite content wrapper and give it a background of white. Now when I come back here and close this and reload the page, that should stay white. Okay, that's much better. Now obviously listing the reservations isn't that helpful. I can see what's going on. I can sort by room if I want to by clicking on the column, and that works really well. But there's a couple of things I don't like here. First of all, I should have some means of clicking on a given reservation and going to detailed information about it, maybe modifying information, maybe deleting information. And also, this date is way too long. I just want 2021-03-10. I don't want the rest of this stuff because I'm always storing things at midnight. I'm just storing things by day, not by time. So I want to make a couple of changes. And what I'm going to do first of all is go over to my render package. So let's go back to our IDE and find our packages for render right here. And you may recall a long time ago we created this variable right here called functions, and it is of type template funcmap. And what this allows us to do is to specify the certain functions that are available to our Golang templates. So what I'm going to do is create a new function, and I'll do it right down here, and I'll call that func human date. In other words, a date that's nice for humans to read, and it will take an argument of named t of type time.time, and it will return a string. And all I'm going to do is take that time that I'm passed and send it back in a particular format. I'll return t.format and give it the layout, and the layout I want is year in 4 digits, and then the month in 2 digits, and then the day in 2 digits. And this is again using that strange reference time that Golang uses. Now I've defined this as human date, and in my func map I can actually put in a name that I can refer to in my Golang template, which I'll call human date with a lowercase h, and that's going to be equal to human date with no parentheses. Now when I restart my application, I will have access to a function in my Golang templates called human date that points to this function, human date, which is this one right here. So let's give this a comment. Returns time in year, month, day format. Okay, so let's stop our application. And I'm going to do one more thing here, just because I hate having to log in every time. I'm going to find my roots and I'm going to disable my auth so I can, while developing, reload admin page templates without having to log in every time. And before I go into production, I'll just uncomment that, and then our security will be back in place. So let's run our application. It's running. And let's go back to our admin layout, or our admin all reservations page, and let's add that function just to this one, human date, which is what I called it in that func map back in my render package. And let's go reload the page. That looks a little better. Okay, so I've now formatted the date in a way that it's less intrusive. It doesn't take up all this horizontal space. And let's put the same function on end date, human date, and reload. Perfect. Okay, so the last thing I want to add right now is I want to make the last name clickable. I want to make it clickable so it will take me to a screen that gives me more information about that particular reservation. And we'll just make the link, and then we'll make the actual handler for that link later on. So let's go back to our template here, and I want to put it on last name. So I'll give myself some room, and I'll just create a link here. Ahref equals, and what do I want that link to be? Well, it's going to start with admin because I want it to be password protected, and it's in the reservations part, so I'll use reservations, and then I want to put in the ID. One more thing I'll add here. Let me get that A tag, closing A tag down where it belongs. I know I'm going to be listing all reservations, and I know I'm going to be listing new reservations. So this is the all part, so I'll just put all there. So the full URL to click on a reservation from this screen will be /admin/reservations/all, and then the ID of the current reservation. So let's just reload that page and make sure that it actually works the way we want it to. And point at it, and if I look in the lower left-hand corner, /admin/reservations/all 5. And there's 6. And there's 4. Perfect. Okay, well that seems like it's coming along reasonably well. The last thing I want to do here is I want to change this so that it's sorted by arrival date. And I can do that. If you look at the documentation for this, the simple data tables documentation, there's all kinds of things listed here. And I already read it, and I know that if I come down here, and in the curly brackets, when I initialize data tables, I actually can say select is an option, and I want to go to the third column starting at 0 and sort by descending. Okay, so we're select 3, sort descending. So I'm selecting the third column starting at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, and now this should be sorted by descending. So let's reload this, and it is. It's working quite well. So 2021, that seems to work well. And I can sort by date this way. Looks great. Okay, that's a little bit better. The last thing I want to do is I have this script, and this script is going to try to run as soon as it possibly can. And I want to defer the running of that script until the document is actually loaded, until everything is there that needs to be there, just to be safe. So I'll just put a listener on here. Document. Add event listener. And the event I'm listening for is DOM content loaded. And I want to, after the DOM content is loaded, after everything is loaded, run a function. And now I'll take this part, these last two things, and get those out of there, and put them after this, and format everything. And now this won't run until the DOM content, until all of the necessary content is loaded. Let's just make sure it works. Reload the page, and it's good. All right, so we have this done. Now, that's the all reservations, and that seems to work pretty well. We're going to do new reservations next, and that's going to require another database query that gets us just new reservations, which is also going to require that we modify the structure for our reservations table and put a new column in there, something like processed with a default of 0. So when a new reservation comes in, it will have a processed column set to the value of 0, and after we process it saying yes, I'm aware of this reservation, it's confirmed, we'll change that to a 1 or something like that. And that'll give us a means of finding reservations that are processed and finding new reservations. And we'll take care of that in the next lecture.